Hi, my name is Kishon Pinckney, and for my presentation and final paper topic, I decided to tackle the topic of black coalitions with a focus on the NAACP and its involvement as an organization following the civil rights movement. First, to provide a brief history of the NAACP, the organization is one of the first and oldest formal African American coalitions. The NAACP was first founded in 1909 by 60 people who came together to end racial discrimination and violence towards African Americans. Of those 60 people involved, only 7 were African American, with a notable member of the group being W.E.B. Du Bois. During its founding, the NAACP had a goal to secure for all people the rights guaranteed in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution, which promised an end to slavery, the equal protection of the law, and universal adult male suffrage, respectively. The NAACP was very involved in racial politics since its formation. Some of the early campaigns that the NAACP led and participated in included the national protest against the film The Birth of a Nation that glorified the Ku Klux Klan, the case of Gwynn versus United States that fought against the grandfather clause that was utilized to suppress the voting rights of minorities, a 30-year campaign to bring an end to lynching, the famous case of Brown versus the Board of Education that was a landmark trial allowing the desegregation of public schools, the Montgomery bus boycott that many argued was the catalyst for the civil rights movement, and the Little Rock Nine, which gained national attention as 9 African American students were enrolled in an all-white school in Arkansas, to much of the community's dismay. The next case that was a major point in the NAACP's activism following the civil rights movement was the case of Milliken versus Bradley. This case was first initiated by the NAACP on August 18, 1970, on the grounds that the Detroit school system was informally enforcing segregation in its public schools through the use of the busing system that purposefully transported white students to majority white schools and black students to majority black schools to keep them separated. The NAACP accused the governor of Michigan, William McKilkin, of violating the rulings of Board versus Brown of Education, as well as the Fair Housing Act, since it utilized the division of communities by race to place students in their schools. At the end of the trial, the court ruled in favor of the Detroit school system and stated that they did not violate the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, since the schools were not 100% white nor 100% black, and thus was not technically segregated. However, the court did rule that Detroit would have to transfer some of its white students into some of its majority black schools to promote equality. What this case did was expose the use of de jure and de facto segregation and how it was used to discriminate against African Americans. Essentially, de jure segregation is segregation that is enforced by law, also now deemed illegal, while de facto segregation is segregation that occurs due to individual preferences that just so happen to cause a separation of races. In 1989, the NAACP hosted a silent march after a march the organization held in 1917. The purpose of the march in 1989 was to protest the recent rulings of the Supreme Court that African Americans believed undermined affirmative action and essentially erased decades of progression by African Americans towards equality. NAACP president at the time, Benjamin Hooks, famously referred to the rulings as legal lynching due to their harshness towards African Americans. During the march, 35,000 people showed up in Washington, D.C. and silently protested the rulings by wearing all black or all white while holding signs to raise awareness for African American rights. What this march demonstrated was the influence that the NAACP maintained after the civil rights movement. In the decade of the 1990s, the NAACP did endure financial hardship that prevented the organization from being as active as it once was. The NAACP needs some form of revenue, whether it be membership fees or donations, to continue its operations. However, in 1990, the NAACP discovered that its current executive director, Benjamin Chavez, had utilized $300,000 of the NAACP's private funds to fund his private sexual harassment lawsuit. Following this event, it was also discovered that NAACP chairman William Gibson had grossly mismanaged the finances of the NAACP and accumulated a great amount of debt for the organization. In 1995, it was estimated that the NAACP was $4 million in debt. Such a large amount of debt required the organization to focus less on activism until it corrected its finances. The NAACP played a critical role in the 2000 presidential race of Al Gore versus George W. Bush. The NAACP publicly endorsed candidate Al Gore and recommended that its members and followers do the same. However, African Americans typically have lower voter turnout in comparison to their white counterparts. To address this, the NAACP created the National Voter Fund to increase the number of African American voters. The fund was a large success as African American voter turnout increased by 1 million people compared to the last election. Although Al Gore ultimately lost the presidential race, the NAACP is credited for winning him major swing states such as Pennsylvania and Michigan. Today, the NAACP is still active in advocating for civil justice and African American rights in America. Due to the progression of America and its racial tensions, as well as the popularity of social media, the NAACP now operates behind the scene and is not in the national spotlight as much as it once was. The organization is active on both the national and local level thanks to its hundreds of offices located across the nation. The NAACP continues to hold its stake in the African American community by actively endorsing movements as well as raising awareness for numerous issues. Thank you.